Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined this week by Jim Harryman of Kinetic Technology Group. Jim, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Chris.
So, I always struggle with topics because everything in cybersecurity seems to be, if you just change the word sequence, it is a topic. And I know that sometimes we get on to record an episode, and we go, did we talk about this before? Knowing that you've been on a few times, and I've also had this conversation with others where it's like I'm having deja vu, but I know it wasn't a conversation with that individual. But I find that if I were to go back and play the episodes that have similar, if not same titles, I don't know that we've ever covered any of the same elements, or if we did, we that wasn't where we focused on the episode just because there's so much going on. And today, as we were trying to figure out what's today's topic, I think what you said about the things that you're working on with your clients is something that's coming up quite regularly, and that is how to determine what you should be implementing with your own clients. And maybe it's tied to what you've implemented in your own MSP, knowing that you have the trust mark, that have gone through some pretty extensive frameworks to show evidence of what you are doing. But that gets into how do you do this with your clients, and how do you determine what safeguards are relevant as you do that evaluation? And we talked about it from a risk assessment standpoint. You're like, maybe that's a little bit too far down the rabbit hole of what you're looking to do, because the idea here is when you implement as an MSP the technology and services that get deployed to a client, what are those tools, and where does the line get drawn between what is your responsibility to put into the environment and what is their responsibility for how they use or take advantage of what you've provided them? And so I'm just curious kind of how you, maybe let's just start with how you have the conversation with the client about the approach to this sort of methodology.
Sure. The toughest thing I think for anybody that is a provider is finding those non-negotiable areas for yourself, and what risks you are willing to take or take on, right? Knowing that there is, for everything that you don't implement, right, there's risk associated with that. Whether you're, using some framework to analyze that risk is completely irrelevant. I mean, you just know that there's that there's risk. If you don't deploy EDR of some sort, there's risk. I mean, that's a non-negotiable, right? Everybody's going to get EDR, right, of some sort, and they should really be getting MDR. Is that a non-negotiable thing? I mean, it kind of just grows from there. And I think everybody has a different level of risk tolerance. I think mine is high, but at the same time, I understand that there are things that, help me sleep at night, right?
Sure.
I know that there are things that we do that is non-negotiable, that everybody gets, that I will, fight to the death over, that some providers may say, well, that's ridiculous. Why do you even do that?
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, I have a couple of examples. Workstation backups, for instance. That is not the norm for an MSP to just say we do this, but we do. Every workstation that we manage gets backed up. Period. There's no argument about it. And so but that comes with a cost, right? And we have to do that, and we have to build our services along that route. And so I think it's really just going back, identifying what your non-negotiables are and leading with that, and then having those things that sit out there on the periphery that you wish that they would do it, for lots of reasons, and it should be more about, closing that risk gap than it is about how much money you're making, right? So, I mean, because those things that don't get implemented still come with a level of risk for you and your client. So,
Yeah, that makes me think about car insurance. You know, you if you lease a car or you're in a car payment plan, you have to have full coverage, right? And when the car's paid off, you get to make a decision that says, I'm going to go to liability only, or maybe you go to comprehensive.
right.
When something happens and you're on either one of those that you no longer have full coverage for, in many cases, the first thing you do is you want to kick yourself because you're like, why did it's not going to happen to me? It'll never happen to me. And I think the granularity of it, when we look at it through the lens of, like, say, you know, endpoint management or user management, it's a far more finite, really what the risks are. It's not like, yeah, the tree fell on the car. If I'd have had comprehensive coverage, it would have covered the tree falling on the car. The probability of the tree falling on the car wasn't very high. In fact, unless you regularly park under a tree, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Um, and then in the case of like how we do endpoint management, though, you know what the probabilities are. There's a reason why you're still concerned about if I think about what you said, wishful. If I wish they would. If you're wishing that they would, I feel like there's more going on there than is my favorite clients are the one that take everything that we want deployed versus the ones that don't. It's like, okay, well, the ones that don't, what makes them worth keeping if they're not your favorites?
Well, I think that, I mean, there's probably a laundry list of answers there. I do believe that, again, going back to those non-negotiables, if you have somebody that, and it may not even be like something that you deploy, like a tool or something along those lines, but, I mean, up until, coming up, MFA for various platforms has been optional, right? And now it's becoming required, and which is good. And
Right.
that should have been happening for years now, and but it hasn't. But our line in the sand is you will implement MFA for every email account that is attached to a user, at least. I know that there are going to be some circumstances where that's impossible for certain things, but really we're working with them to change their mindset of how they're doing business for those things so that we can still secure those shared mailboxes and things of that nature that, aren't necessarily attached to a user. So, but I mean, that kind of, those are the things that get me to fire clients, is like, we're just not going to do MFA. It's just not going to happen. And I'm like, okay, well, see ya. The contract is null and void. Let's just move on,
Yeah.
and no matter how many conversations you have, it just, I'll have three or four, right? Hey, we really need to do this. And it's like, I don't know. And then it's like, absolutely not. This is my business. I'm going to run it the way I want. And then I'm out. And that's kind of how we judge that. So,
So yeah, we've talked through the wishful thinking, the non-negotiables, and what I think really is service delivery as opposed to service responsibility. Where obviously there, and you and I have talked about this before, I can walk through CIS top 18 and I can identify that when I onboard a net new client, these are the CIS safeguards that are going to be implemented because they are becoming our client.
right.
And it's baked into, when we deploy the RMM, it's baked into all of the pieces of the equation. However, that's more tied to client has no participation in that because they signed the agreement with you. It's going to happen, and there could be bumps in the road. An MFA token challenge could cause problems, and so there's obviously some client, agitation that can come with that. And maybe
Sure.
they're like, can you just turn this off for right now? And you're like, you know what, for the next few days, we're turning yours off. We're going to figure out what's going on and then we'll address it. Right. Like, as opposed to, nope, you signed the agreement. This is life going forward. Too bad for you.
Right.
But then there's the other piece. And I think this is the piece that I think as an MSP or an any IT service provider, it's easy to self-reflect and go, well, I'm already doing these things. How hard can this be? So I think about things like password managers, and maybe it's something as simple as syncing a tool between two devices, or using third-party applications to help solve problems that maybe it's a cloud app or some sort of monitoring tool. And we just assume that because we can do those things relatively with ease, that our clients can as well. And they're not problems that are solved by anything that we can do without their participation. So we can't force the end user to use a password manager. We can't force them to, reboot the computer. Like, there are things that you can do that might help with that, but largely they have to take responsibility. Don't print stuff at home. Don't connect to public Wi-Fi. Like, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it is a long list. I mean, though, when you get into those areas, I mean, obviously we want to implement those types of things. I mean, I believe that a password manager makes you safer. Right. I do. I mean, in spite of all the, ups and downs of various password managers over the years from a security standpoint, I still think you're better with them than without them. Right.
Sure.
And I mean, mail filtering is another one, third party outside of Microsoft, something that offers, a continuity aspect to it. If Microsoft goes down, your mail is still accessible and flowing regardless. Right. I mean, there are some things along those lines that I think are great, but they're also the things that are sometimes most difficult for a client to adopt, into their workflow as it exists. No matter how easy we think it is, there's going to be some things to disrupt them, and we have to be prepared to, I think being prepared to have those conversations, what to expect up front, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to, why didn't you tell me this was going to happen,
Well,
or that this could happen kind of
yeah, I
thing.
think
So,
I think I think that's the lose-lose in all of this. You can give 5 examples and they're like, yeah, those are not examples that apply to me. It's the likelihood so low. They say no to something, it happens, and they're like, well, you didn't tell me about it in that context. You didn't give me that lens of perspective that was, you know, in my world of
right.
in my reality, right? But like, going back even as I want to touch on the app stuff, because I think that's a common hurdle that we all face. And we'll come back to the why do you use, tools like Backupify, when Microsoft's backing up my stuff, right? But going back to the workstation backup,
Sure.
why? Like, and I don't mean that to be like you shouldn't, but like, because it's added cost. It's definitely some resource from a configuration standpoint that is comes with it, a lot of potential. This one failed, that one failed. I mean, when we think about backing up servers, the number of servers per client is far smaller than the number of endpoints by and large.
Sure. I mean, there are a number of reasons why. I mean, it started a long time ago for us, and I just felt like it was really the right thing to do. We had, and you could take the approach as like, well, they didn't have data where it was supposed to be, so it's their fault,
Yep.
right? But wouldn't you rather be somebody that saves the day, than, be the, well, I told you so. You put your files here. That's where they get backed up, and I just, there were those kinds of things. I mean, people using their work computers for their personal things, something gets lost and they've got their whole photo library there that wasn't in the cloud 15 years
Sure.
ago, right? And it's just one of those things that has gone on for us to, just do that. At this point, quite honestly, it's an efficiency thing for us. It's much easier to migrate a computer if you have a backup already there that you can just start restoring somebody's desktop instead of, whatever. I mean, it's like,
Yeah, with like hardware, it sure is a whole lot easier today than it was 15 years ago.
exactly. I mean, today that is the primary use case for our business and the use of workstation backups is migrations. I mean, we rarely actually restore a file for a client from their computer, but the efficiencies in having that there and ready for our staff is actually what keeps us doing it at this point.
I mean, to some extent, if you have a uh, unforeseen incident where things have suddenly become encrypted or crippled, the probability of all assets getting hit isn't very high. And in many cases, if they're synchronizing, say, SharePoint locally, there's probably the ability to piece together significant amounts of data that does not have to be like you're negotiating to get it decrypted because you still have a copy
Sure.
somewhere.
Absolutely. And we also know that, there are people that are traveling that are going all over the place. And regardless of how much you want them to work off of,
Sure.
SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Workspace, Box, whatever they're using,
Oh yeah, don't get me
they're
started.
saving stuff to their desktop and there it sits until they put it in the right place. They may be disconnected. They may be creating things. And obviously, it's not going to back it up until it goes online, but as soon as it does, it's there. And if something happens in the meantime, look, it's a win for us. We're the hero. Hey, we were backing up your computer anyway. Don't worry about it. We'll have the file to you in a couple of minutes. Sometimes it's a, cover your ass type scenario where it's, we were doing that and we made a mistake, right?
Right.
So, what better way to to revert than having something there to revert to, right?
Yeah, I can tell you that that was one of the things that I did is I did add my desktop to my sync, to my OneDrive sync, because I found myself from a convenience standpoint, there are certain things that I put on my desktop and I can see them visually just by, clicking a certain part of the desktop and I can visualize those things that are there. Now I don't use it for permanent long term, just because the desktop can get cluttered. But yeah, I think those are some good examples, which kind of leads to the other part of this I wanted to talk about is the conversation around application protection, application security, across the board, like what you said, how do you help them understand that they need to do content filter, or not, I mean, content filtering, yes, but content filtering in the context of email filtering. And why do I need that? I'm already paying for my 365 account. And for that matter, why would you also tell me that I need to do backups of my, OneDrive or fill in the blank? Like I can imagine that this is an extremely complicated conversation. Well, on the one hand, though, I can just say, like, you know, the vendors that create these products wouldn't exist if the primary vendor here was doing all of those things well.
Yeah, I mean, we can take Microsoft for an example, since that's where most people are living. And my feelings on all of these companies, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Apple or whoever, Amazon, the list goes on. I mean, to me, they're no different than any other vendor that we deal with. And
Sure.
do we implicitly trust all of those vendors to do all the things that we expect them to do or to live up to everything they say they, advertise? And
Yeah, no.
if we are in that mindset, then we're going to get burned, you
Yeah.
know? And so, I mean, putting all your eggs in, the Microsoft basket, yeah, that's great. I know people that do it and they're happy and they're going that route. Um, I'm just not built that way, I guess. I think things a little bit differently. I think that placing our trust in one platform or one vendor for everything is silly without some redundancies that are outside
Yeah.
of their ecosystem. Because when their ecosystem, I mean, this is a company that has more vulnerabilities than any other.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
I
like
mean,
anybody's talking about the recent discovery of tokens, right?
right. I mean, the list goes on with that, and I think that, and it's not. And I'm not knocking Microsoft. I mean, we're a partner. We engage with them, and but at the same time, we also know that, look, the best companies in the world make mistakes. The best, they're going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen, and we should prepare for those types of scenarios as much as we can, and as much as we're willing to invest in those things or get our clients to invest in that mindset as well. And I think that that is a cool thing. I mean, when Microsoft goes down and you have a law firm that has a deadline filing and they can't submit it via email
Yeah.
because Microsoft's down, well, having some type of continuity in place to enable them to log into a portal, get the mail, send the mail, whatever they need to do exists. And that's not even the filtering side of it. I mean, if we were just selling a filtering product, I mean, okay, you just add it on in Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just the filtering side of it for me. I think the continuity side and the keeping the business operational to an extent when somebody fails, when a partner fails or whatever the
Yeah.
case may be, we can step in and say, oh yeah, you have this ability, and it may be something they might use once in 5 years, but that one time is going to save their business or you know
Well, you've
their
seen the
moment.
mail redundancy where, maybe it's even a separate domain, right? So you have like, fill in the blank .us as opposed to .com. All mail goes to the initial server, then it is transferred from that domain to the one that you actually to have an
Sure.
inbox for, right? And that one, the latter is in 365 and that whole ecosystem. But if it ever goes down, you can go log into a web interface and there's the inbox that
Right.
is in a, but like, you're asking me questions of like, well, that seems like that would never happen. Why, why am I doing this? Like, I, it's, it's interesting when you think about from a redundancy standpoint, the conversation. I've even seen it now where I've had MSPs tell me that they do not use the same phone system provider as that for which they provide their clients. And the logic was our phone system goes down, is not going to be directly tied to any of our clients. And if our clients' phone systems go down, any of them, it's not tied to our phone system. I think that could be good, bad. It doesn't, but I mean, I think you have to make those decisions. Like, I'm not going to use fill in the blank ISP because all my clients are on that ISP. If that ISP has an outage, then no one can get a hold of us. Or, what are the protocols that we have in place with our clients that they understand? Like, hey, if you can't get a hold of me with plan A, there's a plan B. And I think when you start using that language with your clients, I think to your point, you start to have the conversation that says, oh, the technology itself is not without its flaws, and there's outlying factors that can impact even the best methodologies, the best technologies. So it sounds like, and from what you've said, the conversation isn't necessarily that complicated. It's making sure that you continuously have the conversation as to why the changes keep happening.
Well, precisely. I mean, which is why, several years, well, not several, like 2 years ago, I mean, we started using CIS to assess all of our clients. And basically, that drives all of our conversations now with our clients until they reach a point to where they need to enter into some kind of, security program management where we're getting into policies and their third
Yeah.
party vendor management and so on and so forth that are going to be required, with whatever, yeah, certification, audit, whatever that they're going to have to participate in.
Right.
So, I mean, but up until that point, using CIS is a great way for an MSP to keep the risk conversation going and talk to them about, the things that are not being done and why they're choosing not to do them and how that could impact, and actually leaves them with a, a really good sense of what is happening. So when those questionnaires come in, they can go back to our report. They rarely do. They're still going to call us or email us about
Right.
it, but they can look at it themselves and kind of start to connect the dots and see
Sure.
what's going on and what's not. And so I think it gives us a way to help educate our clients without going into in-depth training about things, but at least to bring some awareness to them about what their gaps are, and what risks are associated with those gaps.
So as you brought it back for us full circle, we talked about how you use, say, the CIS framework, and I would almost go so far as to say it's essentially, and I'm quoting this from memory, I think you've shared this with me, but basically you have a column as you go through the safeguards. And obviously there's some that you don't even need to use when you're doing client facing because they're not relevant. Um, you have the ones that you include. You have the ones that are client. We talked about the client responsibility, like you can't force them to use the password manager. They have to do that on their own. But the third one that we really didn't talk about at all is the shared responsibility. The ones, and I think you just kind of touched on it a little bit, like in some cases you're getting their buy-in without going so far as to say, hey, watch this video, or like attend my 30-minute in-person training on how to use password managers. How do you get buy-in with the shared responsibility matrix?
Well, we have it actually identified whether it's when it's shared responsibility, we kind of have a balancing act there. Is this a shared responsibility that should be led by the client and
Ooh,
their efforts, or led by us and ours with partnering with them? So them leading with us supporting and providing support for them to reach a outcome for a safeguard, right? And then there are the ones that we're going to be driving, but we need information or help from them to make it complete. That might be communication to their entire staff, right? That might
sure.
be whatever that is. And so that's how we've balanced that. Is, are we driving it or are they driving it, and who's providing the support for the the responsible party driving that initiative, whatever it is.
So do you see the challenge there? Like, I guess I'm curious about an example of a client leading. Like, I can understand, like, to some extent you're getting into the governance of any business, right? The policies, the procedures that the organization is living by. We've made this about the organization and not the business owner. We've made it about the organization and not the leadership team. It's not the culture, it's not any one thing, it's more of the overarching. And within that, these are the initiatives that as an organization we have to carry out, and we need, say, Kinetic to help us do that. What's an example of one of those where you just feel like, the client came to you and you're like, man, this is going to be awesome. They already are taking responsibility and ownership of this. They need us to get it done. What does that look like?
Well, I would say really, I mean, if you look at Control 3, it's really all about data, right?
Sure. You
Okay.
can't tell them what data.
Control 3 is largely driven by the client, with us providing support, giving suggestions, or a framework of how we think best to classify, organize, categorize, whatever their data, right? So
Sure.
that is largely driven by the client side, with us providing support. So
You're
that's a
you're more of a facilitator in that regard.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, now backing up the data given, right? All that kind
Sure.
of stuff, fine, whatever. But who has access, how long they have access, things of that nature are really
Yeah, how
driven by
long the
the
data
client.
is kept.
Right. That is all client driven. But the thing is they don't know it, right? They don't know that it's really driven by them, and that
Sure.
ultimately it's their responsibility to protect it and to tell us what needs to be protected. I
Well,
mean,
that's take that to the next control. Like, go back to control two. Supported software.
right?
Like, you and I both know that most MSPs, like these are the applications that we're providing support for, right? 365 rises to the top, and
Sure.
maybe there's a two or three others that, are being managed by you. The rest of them require the client to tell you that they want help with managing those applications. um, Shadow IT isn't necessarily the problem. It's these are the 15, like most MSPs are not managing their clients' QuickBooks,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be managing at some level the administration of QuickBooks, right? Or clearly having a picture that says, fill in the blank client, Acme Corporation is using Intuit's support to manage the users that are in there. It's not just some individual in the organization that's like, oh yeah, I added Jim to our QuickBooks account and he has admin and he can delete, any transaction that he doesn't agree with,
Right. Yeah.
or
No,
add transactions.
control two, just like you said, we have two safeguards that are driven by the client. We don't know what their authorized software to use is. So that's going to be one. You tell us what's authorized, right?
Right.
And so we have to identify that. I think it's 2.3 and 2.4. So it's addressing unauthorized software and automated software inventory tools. Now, that side of it is not so much driven. That's driven by us to provide the list, but then they're going to tell us what is acceptable and what's not.
But to some extent, how hard that one statement is. You can see the apps in some cases. In some cases, you have no idea unless you've got some advanced tools in there. And I think that's where you get back to at the very beginning of this, we talked about what gets deployed. And I think for any MSP out there that doesn't have a clear picture of what's being used versus what's supported or
Right.
just because it is or isn't approved doesn't mean you as the MSP don't want to know what is being consumed. And I
Sure.
think
Absolutely.
largely we haven't had the tools to give us that picture until, the last couple of years, which I think is a big opportunity for MSPs is to go, hey, did you know you're using these applications? Did you know that, accounting isn't even using QuickBooks anymore? Like, what?
Right. Yeah, in those cases, we may not do it on an ongoing basis, but certainly
Sure.
when we're bringing on a client, we'll do that type of scan and show them. If we're engaging with a client on CIS that maybe they've been a client for 20 years, but we're going back through and saying, here are some areas that we can improve. One of them is knowing, what your people are using, right? And so here's a
Right.
list of all the SaaS apps that they're using,
Right.
right? And identifying that. Now, when we get into the security program management type engagement, we're going to do that stuff anyway, and it's going to be an ongoing thing.
Right.
And so, but for most of our clients, it's like, yeah, that's great to know that. Mostly an ad agency isn't going to be too concerned about, Facebook usage or social media usage or whatever, because by and large, a lot of that is part of their job. So that's not a big deal. But on a manufacturing company, that showing up there is going to be a huge deal. Do you want to block it or not? Just let us know. We'll take care of it. It's up to you, not us. So
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty good. I think that covers it. I surprise. We pulled a topic out of thin air and we talked about it for a half an hour. For those of you listening, I think that I would love to hear from our listeners about this particular topic. It's come up in MSP Ignite integrated group. Um, I'll just give this quick example. The perimeter, we joked about it when devices largely moved outside of the container or the box. We started referring to that as the elastic perimeter, where like kind of wherever the user goes. And so you saw this huge push towards really focusing on the security at the endpoint level. And then it's the argument of like, do we still need the firewall at the box or in the cloud or some of those other places? And I think the reality is it's the battle of cost, right? This largely comes down to I can put say that security widget on 100 devices, or I can have a security widget on one device that all those other devices have to communicate through to get out. And it's like, I can't imagine having this conversation on a regular basis, but I could see how clients get confused with, okay, so if I have it on the endpoint, I know I'm paying the $4 or $5 a month for you to secure it at that level. But when you start talking about doing things like your zero trust ZTNA, tools like Cloudflare, and some of those geo-fenced models where you're routing through those types of tools, it can get really confusing. But at the end of the day, the responsibility that the MSP has is to show that there's a path to create the security that fits their budget. And as long as they're willing to participate in that exercise, there's a good chance that, they might not be your favorite client, like you said, but they at least will be a client you don't want to get rid of.
Right. There you go.
All right.
There
For
you
those of
go.
you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.